The story begins with one belief that controls everything in the Empire. Every threat must disappear for the sake of the Emperor, the people, and the survival of the Empire itself. That belief becomes the reason the Imperial Guard exists. In this future world, technology advances far beyond anything humanity once knew, yet none of it brings peace. Earth keeps falling apart because endless wars over resources never stop. The planet slowly becomes unlivable, and humanity eventually loses its home completely after alien creatures invade what remains of Earth. The survivors scatter across space and spend years drifting through the galaxy searching for somewhere to live. After a long period of wandering, humanity finally discovers a planet similar to Earth and names it Novus, seeing it as a new beginning. Messages carrying the coordinates of the planet spread through space, drawing survivors from every corner of the galaxy toward the new world. Several powers rise on Novus. The Balado Federation becomes a free territory where humans and other species live together. The Akrisha Empire builds its strength through robotic soldiers and military power. The Holy Alliance Korra grows into a religious nation known for strong mental power and energy control. Even on this new planet, resources remain limited, and because of that, another war slowly begins to take shape. Sometime later, inside the mechanical laboratories of the Akrisha Empire, Captain Hallis Custoria oversees the training of Imperial Guard recruits. He reminds one trainee that comparisons are unavoidable and that the only thing that matters is proving his worth to the Emperor. Since this stage of training is extremely important, failure carries serious consequences. The trainee, Luca, refuses to back down and internally pushes back against the pressure. He prepares his equipment while focusing on survival. Blocking or dodging every bullet becomes the minimum requirement for officially joining the Imperial Guard. Since he already completes every emergency simulation training program, he enters the test with confidence. The perception enhancement procedure he undergoes sharpens his senses far beyond normal soldiers, giving him an exceptional understanding of spatial awareness. Because of that, the 5 opponents standing before him in cheap cybernetic gear do not seem threatening. In his mind, the entire battle should end within seconds. The moment the test starts, Luca rushes forward and instantly cuts down one opponent before the others can react. At the same time, another thought keeps pushing him forward. If he wants the Emperor to notice him, he needs to stand out in a way nobody expects. Even though he has never attempted such a thing before, he forces his senses to their absolute limit. After switching to a pistol, he controls the battlefield with overwhelming speed and shoots every remaining opponent almost instantly. The victory leaves him satisfied because he knows he surpasses his own limits. In his eyes, this achievement finally increases his value inside the Empire. When he returns, Hallis reacts with visible surprise after realizing Luca uses projectile trajectory control during combat, something far beyond the normal training curriculum. Luca casually explains that he only copies what he sees in front of him. Hallis immediately assumes that someone from a famous family must have trained him beforehand because skills like that normally belong to nobles rather than orphans. At the same time, the captain grows more interested in him and decides to reward him. Luca turns toward him calmly, wanting to know what kind of reward he means. Hallis suddenly moves with a cruel grin and nearly damages Luca's eye just to test his reaction. Even then, Luca does not flinch. That response convinces Hallis that he also trains his pain resistance. The captain enjoys that kind of determination and admits that he plans to replace the eye eventually anyway, with one capable of trajectory prediction. Later, Luca returns to his room where another trainee named Ile appears at the doorway. Ile politely introduces himself and explains that he wants to speak with him despite the sudden visit. Luca quietly allows him inside. After sitting beside him, Ile praises the performance he witnesses during training and admits that it leaves a strong impression on him. Luca immediately makes it clear that empty praise does not interest him. Even without words, Ile's aura reveals that he belongs to the noble Kartika family. Luca understands that offending someone from noble blood could create problems for him, yet exhaustion and habit stop him from pretending to be polite. Ile then hands him a blue capsule and explains that it slightly dulls sensitivity so the body can finally rest properly. Luca initially refuses because he dislikes relying on such things. Ile calmly points out that proper rest matters if he wants to continue training effectively the next day. Mental endurance alone cannot carry someone forever. After hearing that, Luca accepts the pill and immediately notices that it feels far different from the cheap sleeping drugs sold on the streets. The conversation slowly shifts back toward the training grounds. Luca admits that Ile also performs extremely well, and that he only copies what he sees from him. Ile points toward his own eyes, and explains that his mechanical combat eyes naturally calculate trajectories, making such movements easier for him. Because of that, Luca's performance feels even more impressive, since he achieves the same results through pure instinct alone. Ile believes that is exactly why the commander pays attention to him, and even spends his own money to provide him with a mechanical eye. Luca brushes the praise aside and explains that hard work is the only thing available to someone born at the bottom of the hierarchy. Compared to nobles, a weak commoner like him has no choice except grabbing every opportunity he can find. His words leave Ile slightly uncomfortable, because they expose truths even nobles understand, but rarely admit openly. After a short silence, Ile finally reveals what truly bothers him. Many nobles fail the selection process despite their status, yet people with no support rarely fail because reaching that level already requires overwhelming personal effort. He strongly suspects that noble families secretly manipulate results to protect themselves, even if no proof exists. To him, ordinary people who survive the advanced soldier cultivation procedures entirely through their own strength deserve far more recognition. Luca never expects an aristocrat to openly criticize the nobility itself, so the discussion catches him off guard. He quietly wonders what Ile truly wants from him. In response, Ile simply extends his hand with a smile and explains that people like Luca deserve to rise to the top of the empire. He genuinely wants to support him. Luca shakes his hand while carrying the same cold determination that pushes him through every trial. In the end, everything still comes back to one purpose. Every sacrifice, every battle, and every brutal training session exists for the sake of the empire. This story follows the life of a young man raised by the Akrisha Empire not as a normal person, but as a weapon created for war. After some time, Luca and Ile head toward the shooting range together. Luca immediately uses his enhanced vision and lands several perfect shots straight through the heads of the training dummies. Watching this leaves Ile genuinely impressed because every bullet hits the exact target without a single mistake. To him, talented trainees truly feel different from ordinary soldiers. Since Luca recently received the transplanted mechanical eye, Ile wonders if he already adapts to it so quickly. At the same time, he finds it unfair that someone focused on close combat also performs this well in shooting. Luca calmly explains that an Imperial Guard member cannot afford weaknesses with any weapon. At the same time, he points out that Ile repeatedly hits the same exact spot himself, making the complaint meaningless. Ile casually admits that long-range combat is his specialty. Luca then warns him that if he keeps acting so relaxed during training, someone else might eventually surpass him. Instead of feeling offended, Ile smiles because that possibility actually pleases him. From the beginning, he already supports Luca's growth. In Ile's eyes, the Empire slowly loses its ability to recognize real talent. Wealth and noble status now cover weakness so easily that untalented people continue climbing higher without deserving it. Because of that, naturally gifted commoners like Luca becoming visible could force people to finally notice the difference between true ability and fake prestige. Hearing this makes Luca serious because those words sound dangerously close to criticizing the foundation of the Akrisha Empire itself. He reminds Ile that if someone reports such thoughts to the higher authorities, even the Kartika family would not escape punishment easily. Ile simply smiles after hearing the warning. Since he trusts Luca's character, he never worries about betrayal in the first place. He even appreciates the concern behind the warning. Luca reacts with irritation because Ile's calm attitude keeps getting under his skin. 2 years pass, and both of them continue growing stronger inside the third training building. One day, Captain Halas Custoria gathers everyone and announces that Luca and Ile will lead the squads during the next field exercise. Anyone unhappy with the decision is free to leave immediately. Since nobody objects, the mission proceeds according to plan. The target is a settlement hidden inside a ravine where Khorites illegally established themselves. This mission exists to test combat ability in real battlefield conditions, not simulations. Halas makes the objective completely clear. No prisoners are allowed. Every target must die. Soon after, the squads move out toward the settlement. While walking, Ile points out that this is their first real mission outside training grounds. Luca notices the tension behind his words and understands what bothers him. Killing during simulations differs greatly from facing an actual outside force. Ile quietly reflects on the fact that the Bellado Federation, the Holy Alliance, Korra, and even the Akrisha Empire all originate from humanity on Earth. Despite becoming enemies, they still share the same roots. Luca immediately shuts down those thoughts before emotions can grow further. He reminds him that the senior guards from the Mechanical Legion are not there to protect trainees. They are there to monitor them. Anyone attempting mercy or disobedience would die instantly. The Imperial Guard has no place for soldiers who forget their role. From childhood, they are taught to view every outsider on Novus as parasites trying to exploit the Empire for personal gain. Islay already understands that because the Empire drills those beliefs into all of them from the start. Not long after, the assault completely destroys the settlement. Luca moves through the wreckage with his sword in hand and quickly notices that many Korites are not even armed. The mission initially appears easy and uncomplicated. Then he approaches a terrified child hiding against a wall while desperately calling for his mother. The child shakes so badly that movement becomes impossible. At that moment, Luca remembers the commander's order about leaving no survivors. He forces himself to raise his sword while repeating the Empire's teachings in his head. According to everything drilled into him, these people are nothing more than pests consuming the Empire's resources. Even so, when the blade comes down, he intentionally drives it into the wall beside the child instead of into the child himself. Quietly, he instructs the child to pretend to be dead in order to survive. The moment he steps away, regret immediately begins eating at him. If the higher authorities discover what he just does, his future could disappear instantly. Part of him even considers returning to finish the job before anyone notices. Then disaster strikes before he can decide anything. From above, Islay fires a shot from a tower and kills the child instantly. Luca freezes in shock because he never even realizes Islay is watching the entire time. Panic immediately fills his mind. He tries convincing himself that Islay probably will not report him, but the fear remains. If someone else witnesses his hesitation, things could become far worse. Before he can think further, an explosion suddenly destroys the tower. A furious enemy power user appears and demands that they leave immediately. Luca quickly realizes the explosion happens without any visible weapon, making the situation far more dangerous than expected. This enemy clearly possesses supernatural abilities. At the same time, Islay jumps from the collapsing tower to attack from behind, but the enemy instantly creates another explosion and blows him away mid-attack. Luca watches in horror as the attack tears off Islay's arm and leg. The enemy furiously condemns them for slaughtering ordinary people who are only struggling to survive inside a settlement rather than a military base. Hearing that makes Luca realize the commanders probably know the truth about this place from the beginning. If only someone explains it earlier, things might have turned out differently. Meanwhile, Islay lies on the ground in terrible condition and bitterly admits that his own carelessness causes this outcome. Luca immediately takes responsibility onto himself because he knows hesitation during the earlier moment weakens his focus. He already studies methods for dealing with power users many times during training, so now he decides to atone for his mistake personally. With a serious expression, he orders everyone else to retreat back to base while he handles the enemy alone. The remaining soldiers quickly escape without hesitation. The enemy angrily notices the retreat, but Luca understands the situation clearly. He intentionally stays behind as bait so the others can survive. During the fight, he carefully studies the enemy's abilities and notices an important pattern. Every explosion requires a sequence of hand movements before activation. Small cracks in space appear right before each attack. As long as he tracks those signs, survival remains possible. Because of that realization, Luca starts dodging every explosion at extreme speed while forcing his body far beyond safe limits. He would rather drag the battle out slowly, but Islay's injuries leave no time for caution. Even if the strain destroys his body, he still has to end the fight quickly. Finally, he closes the distance and reaches the enemy's magic sphere. Using one explosive burst of speed, he thrusts his sword forward and lands a fatal strike. In desperation, the sorcerer gathers magical energy into his hand and smashes Luca's helmet apart with one final blow. The broken helmet reveals Luca's face, and the enemy suddenly realizes that the soldier standing before him is only a child. Even then, Luca does not stop. He completes the attack and kills him. After the battle ends, Luca stares silently at the shattered helmet and understands how close death comes. One more direct hit would have killed him instantly. He also cannot understand why his emotions interfere during the fight. The Korites are fanatics whose beliefs stand completely against the Empire, yet he still hesitates. That weakness frustrates him because emotions have no place on the battlefield. In the end, he forces himself to return to the only belief the Imperial Guard allows him to have. Everything exists for the Empire, for the Emperor, and for the survival of their people. Any threat must disappear. That duty alone defines the purpose of the Imperial Guard. Sometime after the mission, Luca recovers inside the Accretion Ward recovery room, while Ile rests nearby. Since both of them barely survived the battle, the conversation naturally returns to the mission. Ile reflects on how close they come to dying, and wonders if Luca finally feels the thin line between life and death after experiencing a real battlefield. Luca lies calmly inside the recovery capsule and shifts the focus back toward Ile instead. In his eyes, Ile is the one who almost loses his life during the fight. Even after suffering terrible injuries, Ile remains unusually relaxed and jokes about receiving new mechanical arms and legs anyway. Because body replacement technology already becomes normal inside the Accretia Empire, losing limbs no longer shocks soldiers the way it once would. Luca explains that his own injuries mainly damage his back, so he orders titanium bones and artificial skin to replace the weakened parts. Since he already plans to fully rebuild his body with mechanical enhancements within a few years, starting earlier simply speeds up the process. As the discussion continues, Ile starts thinking back to the mission itself. The more he reflects on it, the stranger everything feels. Captain Halas Custoria most likely already knows that a power user waits inside the settlement, yet he intentionally hides that information to test them properly. Luca agrees with that conclusion because the senior guards never interfere during the fight. Their silence makes it obvious that the trainees are expected to survive through their own strength. Since nobody officially dies during the mission, the commanders probably consider the operation successful. Still, something continues bothering Ile. Even the cadet whose head is destroyed by the enemy somehow survives afterward. Because of that, he starts doubting the enemy's intentions. To him, the mage may never truly intend to kill them at all. Luca remembers the enemy's final words during the battle, but instead of feeling sympathy, he forces himself toward a colder conclusion. In his mind, showing mercy to enemies only creates more suffering later. He views his hesitation toward the Korite child as weakness rather than kindness. Because of that moment, he feels disgusted with himself. The Empire trains him to become a soldier, not someone ruled by emotions. Regret, pity, and hesitation only create danger. Ile eventually brings up the child directly, because he already witnesses everything during the mission. Luca immediately turns away, clearly irritated by the subject. He dismisses the conversation and bitterly remarks that Ile's new mechanical body parts apparently also improve his ability to keep talking endlessly. Then he coldly explains that his hesitation is nothing more than a mistake that will never happen again. Time continues moving forward, and eventually, the trainees complete 2 out of their 4 years inside the Imperial Guard program. During a formal gathering, the Emperor personally addresses the cadets and announces the arrival of a new generation of recruits. Because Luca and Ile stand at the top of their class as the first and second-ranked trainees, they are presented as examples for the newcomers. The Emperor even hints that both of them possess the potential to become future centurions if they continue serving the Empire properly. While listening, Luca quietly thinks about the structure of the Imperial Guard itself. The organization contains 1,000 guards divided into 10 separate hundreds, each commanded by a centurion. Above them stands the chief centurion, who also leads the first 100 directly. For someone like Luca, becoming the centurion of the 10th hundred would already change everything. Cadets who fully replace their bodies with mechanical parts are usually assigned there first, making it the lowest but still respected rank among centurions. Even reaching that level would open countless opportunities for him. Later, Luca and Ile continue their combat training through non-stop hand-to-hand battles. During another match, Luca blocks every attack effortlessly and immediately notices how much stronger his new mechanical arm makes him. After gaining control of the fight, he sweeps Ile's leg and prepares the final strike before stopping at the last moment. With obvious satisfaction, he points out that they complete 124 matches and that he wins every single one of them. That night, both of them sat outside on top of one of the halls while resting after training. Ile admits that he genuinely hopes to win at least once, but Luca dismisses the complaint immediately. If replacing body parts alone guarantees victory, then training itself would become meaningless. Hearing that only convinces Ile further that Luca grows harsher and more driven over time. Ever since the Emperor mentions the position of centurion, Luca's determination becomes even stronger. Luca openly admits that success inside the Imperial Guard guarantees value everywhere in the Empire. Unlike nobles born with status, he has nothing waiting for him outside the military. Since he has nowhere to return to, the only option left is continuing upward no matter what. From his perspective, Ile also possesses talent but lacks true motivation. That observation causes Ile to finally reveal the reason he joins military service in the first place. Deep down, he never wants to become a soldier. His real dream is studying forgotten civilizations as a scientist and archaeologist. He becomes fascinated by the mysteries left behind by ancient races, long before humanity spreads across the stars. Luca immediately questions why he never pursues that path if it matters so much to him. Ile explains that archaeology is forbidden inside the Empire, especially research connected to ancient civilizations. On top of that, his family constantly produces military leaders and generals, meaning they never allow him to choose another future. Luca reacts harshly because his own upbringing makes such complaints difficult to understand. Growing up in the slums teaches him that most people only dream about surviving another day or finding enough food to eat. Compared to that reality, noble frustrations feel meaningless to him. Ile already expects that response, but he still quietly explains that he only wants to share his thoughts with someone he considers a friend. Luca immediately warns him again that criticizing the Empire so openly could destroy him if the wrong person hears it. Ile calmly points out that Luca keeps his secrets too, especially the truth about the Korite child. At that point, Luca finally explains himself directly. He hesitates only because the enemy is unarmed. Even then, he insists that he would eventually finish the task himself if Ile never interferes. No matter what emotions appear during the moment, his loyalty toward the Emperor and the Empire remains absolute because the Empire is the only reason someone like him is ever recognized. Anyone standing against the Empire automatically becomes his enemy as well. Ile jumps down from the hall with a smile after hearing that explanation. To him, Luca is clearly lying to himself. If his loyalty truly surpasses ordinary devotion, then he would already try killing Ile for discovering his weakness. Instead, Luca continues protecting him. Ile believes Luca forces himself too hard to become something colder than he really is. Rather than denying it, Luca simply calls him an idiot and warns that his attitude will eventually get him killed. Later, both of them participate in a reconnaissance mission across neutral, uninhabited territory. During the operation, Ile places his hand against a massive ancient pillar and becomes fascinated by the energy still flowing through it despite millions of years passing. The ruins prove that advanced civilizations exist long before humanity ever reaches the stars. Luca immediately grows irritated again because Ile continues stepping into forbidden subjects, no matter how many warnings he receives. He reminds him that this is a reconnaissance mission, not an archaeological expedition. Training missions can turn into combat at any moment if enemies appear. Ile casually brushes aside the concern because Imperial Guard overseers are nearby anyway. In his mind, they will step in if things become truly dangerous. At that moment, another cadet named Claude Ramones approaches them. Coming from a respected family himself, Claude shares Ile's interest in history and ancient civilizations. To him, understanding the past also helps people understand the future. That belief explains why so many individuals become fascinated with history despite the Empire restricting it. Then the conversation suddenly shifts in a completely unexpected direction. Claude awkwardly admits that he likes Luca and wonders if he already has a partner. The moment those words leave his mouth, Luca instantly enters a combat stance and treats the approach as a possible threat. Claude quickly calms the situation and explains that he simply wants to introduce Luca to his younger sister, if he is interested. Luca immediately points out that he is only an orphan, with no family or noble background. Claude dismisses that issue entirely because Luca already holds an honorable position through his own ability. In Claude's eyes, status earned through strength matters more than bloodline. He casually encourages Luca to think about the offer because his sister is beautiful. Before Luca can respond properly, Ile walks over and starts teasing him for suddenly becoming popular. Luca reacts with obvious embarrassment and irritation. Then the atmosphere changes instantly. A strange biological reaction suddenly spreads through the area, forcing every soldier to put on helmets and hide behind nearby trees. Luca immediately understands that danger is approaching. Ile's group quickly moves into a rear support position, while Luca and Claude stay closer to the front. As Luca carefully looks ahead, he notices something moving rapidly toward them. The moment he recognizes the figure, fear immediately crashes into him. A Korite paladin charges straight toward their position at terrifying speed. Realizing how dangerous the enemy is, Luca urgently orders everyone to run. Before anyone can react properly, the paladin reaches them and strikes Claude Ramones with overwhelming speed. The moment Claude Ramones is struck, Luca barely manages to catch a glimpse of the incoming spear. Even that tiny reaction comes too late, because the upper half of Claude's body disappears instantly. The attack happens so fast that Luca's fear overwhelms him before he can even fully process what he sees. At the same time, warning windows begin flashing inside his vision because his mechanical eye struggles to keep up with the enemy's movements. Desperation immediately takes over his thoughts. He forces himself to rely on the eye completely and mentally pushes it to calculate the spear's trajectory before the next strike reaches him. More soldiers arrive behind him, but the situation only grows worse. Ile immediately opens fire on the enemy, while trying to snap Luca out of his frozen state. Standing still means death. Since escape is impossible against an opponent this fast, the only remaining option is surviving long enough for Imperial Guard reinforcements to arrive. Luca quickly reaches the same conclusion. Running would only expose his back and get everyone killed faster. The only thing that matters now is buying time. According to his calculations, the overseer from the Imperial Guard should arrive in around 20 seconds. Even so, those 20 seconds already feel endless. The Korite paladin suddenly swings the spear and throws it forward with terrifying speed. Luca barely manages to dodge in time, but the attack tears away his helmet completely. The near miss leaves him shaken because the difference between survival and death becomes painfully small. Before he can recover, the paladin activates another skill and recalls the spear back toward himself. The weapon instantly changes direction and flies toward Luca again from behind. At that moment, hopelessness briefly fills his mind because surviving against a monster like this for even 20 seconds feels impossible. Then another memory forces its way into his head. Luca recalls the Legion commander mocking weak soldiers who panic when facing death. To the commander, turning one's back on the enemy only leads to execution anyway. If the enemy attacks with a blade, then a true Imperial Guard soldier must attack back without hesitation. Weakness has no place inside the Guard. That memory immediately reignites Luca's fighting spirit. Instead of retreating, he decides to strike first, before the enemy can fully overwhelm him. He charges straight toward the incoming spear and blocks it with his arm. The impact shatters the limb instantly, but the block still succeeds. Pain shoots through his body, yet Luca forces himself to stay focused. Even if the arm becomes useless, he can still use it to absorb attacks. Right now, surviving matters more than preserving his body. The Korite paladin does not give him time to recover. Another lightning-fast strike cuts Luca's arm off completely. The sheer force behind the attack creates shockwaves that slam into the other squad members standing behind him. Through the chaos, Luca notices Ile among them and immediately worries that the enemy's real target might actually be him. Despite losing an arm, Luca still refuses to step back. While the paladin advances forward, Luca moves toward him instead. By this point, his only goal is delaying the enemy for a few more seconds. Then the Imperial Guard overseer finally arrives. Using turbo engines attached to his legs, the overseer bursts into the battlefield at incredible speed. Just before Luca collides head-on with the paladin, the overseer grabs the enemy by the head, drags him across the ground, and smashes him violently into one of the ancient columns nearby. The sudden appearance of the overseer instantly fills Luca with relief because reinforcements finally reach them before the situation completely collapses. For a brief moment, he believes they survive. That relief disappears almost immediately. Behind, the Korite paladin rises back to his feet again, completely ready to continue the battle as if nothing happens. Luca watches the battlefield in shock while the Imperial Guard overseer clashes directly against the Korite paladin. One side fights using the Empire's Legion armor, while the other relies on the terrifying force abilities of the Holy Knight Corps. The battle instantly turns violent enough to shake the entire area apart. Even with Luca's enhanced vision, tracking their movements becomes nearly impossible. Their weapons move too quickly for his eyes to properly follow, making it obvious that this fight exists on an entirely different level from anything he experiences before. At that moment, all he can do is hope the Imperial Guard wins, because everyone's survival depends on it. The two monsters collide again and again, without either side giving ground. Then the Overseer suddenly grabs the Paladin by the head and forces him toward the ground, trying to crush him with pure strength. Even so, the Paladin refuses to break and desperately continues resisting. At the same time, the spear lying behind Luca suddenly responds to its master's command and shoots back toward the battlefield at incredible speed. The moment Luca notices it, a terrible realization hits him immediately. Unlike him, the Overseer never personally experiences the true speed and destructive force of that spear before. Because of that, there is a good chance the guard reacts too slowly. That thought leaves Luca no time to hesitate. If the Overseer dies, then everyone else dies right after him. The moment the spear flies forward, Luca instantly throws his leg into its path. The impact tears the limb away completely, but the attack changes direction just enough to miss its target. Seeing the incoming spear at the last second, the Overseer immediately understands what almost happens and uses the opening to launch one final attack. The Korite Paladin desperately reaches for the returning weapon with the last of his strength, but the Overseer lands a crushing blow first and slams him deep into the ground. A massive explosion erupts across the battlefield. For several moments, Luca cannot understand what happens afterward. Smoke and debris cover everything, leaving him unable to tell who survives the clash. His mind desperately searches for signs that the Paladin somehow remains alive because enemies like that do not feel human anymore. Then a familiar figure walks toward him. The Imperial Guard Overseer stops nearby and calmly praises Luca for his actions. According to him, defeating the Paladin becomes possible only because Luca interferes with the spear at the critical moment. Luca barely listens because pain continues spreading through his body. He quietly explains that he gets hit while trying to avoid the enemy's force attack. The Overseer reaches out a hand and informs him that they are returning to base now. When Luca finally looks up properly, horror immediately freezes him in place. The Overseer no longer has a head. At that moment, Luca fully understands what the Legion truly is. The Legion armor completely replaces weak and vulnerable human body parts with mechanical systems designed only for combat. Every cadet dreams about receiving it because obtaining a Legion means becoming a true Imperial Guard soldier. Until now, Luca only focuses on the strength and status connected to it. Seeing a soldier continue moving and speaking normally without a brain completely destroys that image. Fear immediately overwhelms him because the figure standing before him no longer feels human. The difference between man and machine suddenly disappears in the worst possible way. Even the Overseer reacts strangely for a moment, almost confused about whether Luca's own brain remains functional after the battle. That sight completely breaks Luca's composure. Terror consumes him so badly that his body starts shaking uncontrollably before he collapses onto the ground. For the first time, he seriously wonders if this monstrous existence is truly the future he spends his entire life chasing. As his condition worsens, Luca becomes convinced that death is approaching. His injuries are too severe, and his body continues losing strength. Then, in the middle of that hopelessness, Ile suddenly appears beside him. Relief immediately floods Luca because he genuinely believes Ile dies during the battle. Ile admits that he barely survives and remains in terrible condition himself, but he still manages to return. Luca then learns the full outcome of the fight. Every other soldier dies. Only the two of them remain alive. After hearing that, Ile checks Luca's injuries, but Luca already understands the truth. He calmly accepts that he is dying. Since there is no point hiding it anymore, he encourages Ile to finally pursue the dream he always talks about. The borders leading toward the Holy Alliance Korra and the Balado Federation are nearby, and the things Ile truly wants can never exist inside the Empire. Reinforcements will arrive eventually, meaning this may become his only chance to escape and live freely. Ile slowly stands up and begins walking away. While watching him leave, Luca quietly reflects on the difference between them. Ile always has a noble family, wealth, and support waiting behind him. Most citizens of the Empire would envy a life like that. Even so, Luca understands that Ile shines brightest whenever he speaks about his personal dreams rather than military duty. Because of that, Luca genuinely wishes for him to survive and live the life he actually wants. Eventually, Luca closes his eyes and prepares himself for death. Then footsteps return. Ile comes back with a tired smile and makes it obvious that Luca already behaves like someone preparing for the afterlife. In the end, he cannot abandon him here and continue living peacefully afterward. Hearing that finally eases some of the tension inside Luca. Relief mixes with frustration as he internally wonders what kind of idiot would come back to save someone in a situation like this. Luca spends his recovery days inside the hospital while going through catalogs of cybernetic parts, trying to understand what kind of upgrades he can use next. Since his body already gets heavily damaged during the last mission, he starts thinking in a practical way about full replacement instead of normal healing. While he studies the options, Ile suddenly appears behind him again and casually comments that he is probably searching for spare parts for himself. He suggests a specific model, the F-24 race unit, and explains that it shortens adaptation time and restores combat ability faster than Luca's current leg system. Luca reacts with irritation because Ile keeps showing up without warning. He questions why Ile always appears like that. Ile responds with a light tone and explains that he only tries to joke and even wonders if Luca feels scared of him, then suggests that he can stop if it bothers him. After returning to the Empire and going through initial recovery, Luca gets pulled into a formal debriefing. The authorities question him about the incident where 3 cadets and an Imperial Guard overseer die during the mission. The event gets labeled as an encounter with a Korite paladin. At first, Luca assumes it is a full investigation into the battle, but he soon realizes the focus shifts in a different direction. While waiting, another officer named L.A. informs him that an unknown artifact gets discovered at the same location where the mission takes place. Because of that discovery, internal groups start arguing about who should control it. Luca immediately understands the connection and realizes that the floating cube he sees during the mission becomes the cause of all the political tension. He asks who ends up receiving the artifact. The response explains that a specialized research unit gets assigned to secure it. Since the Holy Alliance refuses to give it up, the situation slowly turns into a potential large-scale conflict. If war breaks out between the Empire and the Alliance, the Bellotto Federation benefits by staying out and watching both sides weaken each other. Because of that, all major powers try to limit themselves to small, controlled clashes instead of full war. Luca reacts with indifference because politics never interests him. He focuses only on direct orders and combat, which he considers the only proper mindset for an Imperial Guard soldier. In his mind, survival and obedience matter more than political meaning. At the same time, he recalls his report from the battlefield, where he describes the behavior of the beheaded guard. The captain concludes that the incident results from a phantom reaction caused by leftover signals in the mechanical system. However, Luca does not accept that explanation internally because the movement feels too intentional. He believes the guard reacts consciously even after death, which makes the situation far more disturbing. Even so, he avoids digging deeper because the truth feels too dangerous to explore. Later, Luca enters a guest room inside the training grounds, a place normally reserved for family or close visitors of cadets. Since he grows up as an orphan, he never enters such rooms before and never expects anyone to visit him there. To his surprise, Lillian Ramones arrives along with Claude's sister connection, which immediately confuses him. He initially assumes she comes either to blame him for Claude's death or to confront him as squad leader. However, she calmly explains that she carries no hatred toward him because their family already accepts the risks once Claude chooses to join the Imperial Guard. She further explains that Claude speaks about Luca frequently, describing him as the most talented cadet he knows. That becomes the reason she comes forward with a personal proposal instead of hostility. She directly proposes forming a relationship, which shocks Luca. He responds by pointing out his low origin and assumes she already understands it. Lillian clarifies that she approaches him by her own decision and that only minor formalities remain if he agrees. Luca notices that she seems serious about forming a relationship, but he still questions the reason behind it. She explains that Claude leaves a request before dying, and she considers that request enough reason to proceed. She also adds that many people would envy such an opportunity because she comes from a noble family and holds strong status. Luca initially agrees with her logic because rejecting a noble alliance brings no clear benefit. From a strategic view, such a marriage increases his status and brings him closer to success inside the Empire. However, he still feels something unnatural about how easily everything falls into place, and that doubt slowly builds inside him. After thinking for a while, Luca ultimately rejects the proposal. He stands up and leaves with a serious expression, while internally criticizing Ilei's earlier dream of escaping the Empire. At the same time, he realizes that he now acts just as irrational by rejecting a clear advantage based on suspicion alone. That contradiction leaves him uneasy, but he continues moving forward anyway. Lillian quickly follows him and grabs his hand, then softens her tone and suggests starting as friends instead of immediately forming a relationship. Luca tries to explain that his rejection is not personal, but she ignores his attempt and leaves while saying she will return again later. Watching her leave, Luca realizes that avoiding her presence may not become easy in the future. Sometime later, Luca moves to the sparring training ground, where he meets a wrestling instructor named Kim Yuan. The instructor reacts calmly and notes that he does not expect Luca to come for training directly under him. Luca responds with a serious attitude and states that he wants to learn from him properly. Kinuan agrees and explains that he can teach wrestling techniques, but he already understands Luca's level and believes that few cadets in the entire group match his strength. Luca interprets this as a challenge and thinks that being top of the cadets is not enough for his goal. Kinuan then questions why Luca pushes himself so hard. Luca reflects internally that although the instructor is strong, he still does not match the overwhelming level of the enhanced soldiers or previous enemies he faces, especially compared to threats like the Korite Paladin. He understands that the instructor uses a weaker enhancement system compared to full Legion bodies, which explains the difference in raw power. Even so, Luca respects the opportunity and prepares to train seriously. Kinuan sighs and allows him to attack freely since he has no intention of holding back. Luca charges forward with a fast strike, but the instructor easily blocks it. When Luca tries to continue with follow-up attacks, he builds a plan in his mind to overwhelm Kinuan with speed and close-range pressure, believing that victory depends on maintaining momentum. However, Kinuan breaks that expectation immediately by grabbing Luca and throwing him through the air without effort. Luca becomes confused as he loses control mid-air, but he quickly tries to recover by pushing off the ground and attacking again. Before he can land another hit, Kinuan catches him again and throws him forward with complete ease. At that moment, Luca realizes the situation is completely different from what he expects. Kinuan points out that Luca misreads the opponent's strength and also loses focus during combat because of unnecessary distractions. He questions Luca's impatience and highlights that rushing forward without understanding the opponent leads to failure in real fights. Luca looks at the situation with shock because the first strike from Kinuan should have connected, yet everything suddenly changes in an instant. The attack that targets Kinuan does not behave normally, because the moment it touches him, the force gets reflected and the attacker loses control of his own movement. Instead of damaging Kinuan, the impact bends back into the attacker's body and throws him off balance. Luca drops to the ground in confusion and immediately demands an explanation for what just happens. Kinuan calmly explains that it is his personal defensive technique, built specifically to redirect incoming force instead of absorbing it. Luca instantly shows interest in learning it and asks for training. Kinuan does not answer directly, and instead points out that Luca is already injured and still insists on learning something dangerous. A moment later, blood leaks from Kinuan's hand, and he explains that every shortcut in combat always carries a cost, so nothing comes free. After that, both of them sit facing each other inside the training arena. Kinuan then asks Luca what he understands from his previous fight experience. Luca explains that during combat, it feels like his body stops obeying him and moves on its own as if controlled by something else. Kinuan identifies this state as Ares' victim, a combat condition linked to instinct override. Luca immediately compares it to techniques used by bandits and illegal fighters, since the pattern feels similar. Kinuan responds by explaining that the Imperial Guard already studies it and even uses it in controlled training, but the technique has serious limitations that make it dangerous for long use. Luca questions whether it is difficult to learn. Kinuan notices his sharp thinking and confirms that side effects like brain damage are part of the cost. He also adds that there is another consequence that Luca will only understand later. Luca responds that as long as strength increases, the risks are acceptable. Kinuan immediately rejects that idea and explains that Luca does not have full authority to decide that because the Empire already treats him as an asset. He also warns that a lot of resources get invested into soldiers like him, so reckless decisions cannot be allowed. Luca almost reacts angrily, but Kinuan interrupts him and orders him to focus on the training rules. He explains that using the Ares fighting style always leads to brain strain, and he forces Luca to promise that he will stop using it if the damage becomes serious. Luca internally knows that Kinuan does not trust blind promises, even if they are lies, so he finally agrees in a controlled way that he will try to avoid it instead of fully swearing. Kinuan studies his answer, then places a hand on his shoulder and suddenly knocks him down with a fast leg sweep. Before Luca can react, he gets thrown across the mat. Kinuan then explains that real combat always starts when the opponent attacks, so waiting and reacting properly becomes necessary for survival. He instructs Luca to always expect sudden attacks, so he stays prepared. Luca lies on the ground for a moment, then gets up while accepting the lesson. After some time passes, Ile meets Luca in the hallway and notices that he is pushing himself too hard. Luca responds that he has been training every day under Kinuan for a full month. He reflects that Kinuan does not directly teach fixed techniques, but instead forces him to learn by observation. That method creates confusion at first, but it slowly changes the way he thinks in combat. Luca realizes that the Ares fighting style is not a normal system of memorized movements. Instead, it pulls out the user's natural instincts and reorganizes them into the most effective response depending on the situation. It feels less like training and more like rewriting the brain into a faster decision system. Ile then talks about his recent mission and describes it as boring because it only involves destroying a malfunctioning android. He explains that most current missions lack intensity because everything feels controlled and predictable. Luca connects this to the recent incident and suggests that the Holy Alliance Korra becomes more cautious after the previous conflict, which explains why high-level commanders stay closer to key facilities. He also notes that if the Chief Centurion gets involved, it likely means a larger conspiracy is forming. Ile confirms that he hears similar rumors from his relatives, but avoids giving full details. Luca then concludes that a civil war could be forming inside the system itself, while external conflict with the Alliance also approaches. He expresses frustration because internal rebellion during an approaching war only weakens the Empire further. Ile warns him that calling everything stupid still makes him part of the same system he criticizes. That statement triggers Luca's anger, and he immediately pushes Ile against the wall and raises his fist while warning him not to cross a line that sounds like betrayal. Even though Ile already passes the Imperial Guard aptitude test, Luca refuses to accept careless talk about internal collapse. Luca then walks away while telling him to stop making statements that can be misunderstood as treason. Ile responds calmly that he understands, and can only trust Luca with such information. He then suddenly changes the mood by inviting Luca to relax on the weekend. Luca refuses immediately and says he already has plans. Ile accepts the rejection and leaves the topic alone, while Luca walks ahead and his comrade follows behind in surprise, wondering if Luca actually makes plans with someone. Sometime later, both of them arrive at the lower sector of Arcadia. Kinuan observes how much time passes and reminds Luca that this environment feels familiar to people from the slums. Luca responds that he expects to never return to a place like this after becoming a cadet because he does not want to breathe the same polluted air again. Kinuan then comments that Luca truly aims for the top without hesitation. As they move deeper, Luca notices fights and arguments between people in the streets and realizes how harsh the lower sector still is. The air remains heavily polluted because the city releases waste heat from the magma system below, pushing all the toxic air into this area. Luca remembers how he once lives in similar conditions and understands why he always wants to escape that life completely. Kinuan then leads him through a corner and tells him to follow without delay. When Luca looks ahead, he notices heavily guarded entrances and immediately questions whether the place is a black market. Kinuan confirms it indirectly by asking if it is his first time in such a place, and then explains that only those who survive curiosity reach this level. Luca becomes more cautious because Kinuan seems far more familiar with the lower sector than expected for a military instructor. The group reaches a guarded entrance where armed men block the path and demand identification. When Kinuan tries to pass, the guards question his connection and raise weapons to stop him. Kinuan calmly requests to meet the owner of the place, but the guards react aggressively and aim guns at them. Luca immediately responds by attacking one guard, disarming him, and pinning him down before turning the weapon toward the second guard to control the situation. Kinuan observes the reaction and calmly notes that the entry problem now gets resolved through force. He then asks the guards to contact the owner named Aleph. The guards drop their weapons after realizing resistance will not work. Luca questions what Kinuan would have done if the situation escalated further. Kinuan explains that he would simply find another way, instead of forcing a direct path. Luca then demands to know what kind of place they are entering. Kinuan finally answers that it is the most dangerous and active place inside the entire empire. he reveals that the destination is the Colosseum. Luca stands inside the closed room of the Colosseum, while armed guards remain outside, waiting as the negotiation between him, the instructor, and the Colosseum owner continues. Inside, the atmosphere stays tense because the owner, Aleph, watches them while smoking and analyzing their purpose. Kinuan directly points at Luca and states that he should be sent into the arena. He further informs that even if Luca dies during the fight, no compensation will be demanded. Luca immediately understands the situation and realizes that Kinuan already prepares him as a disposable fighter for this environment, which explains why he was told to bring lighter equipment earlier. Aleph listens silently and then flicks his cigarette toward Kinuan. Luca reacts fast enough to catch it, which immediately shifts attention from the negotiation to confrontation. The guards outside raise their weapons as tension escalates. Aleph calmly explains that they are not inside the Colosseum for cooperation, but because it is easier to deal with bodies this way if things go wrong. Luca instantly reads the situation as intimidation, rather than a real threat, because if Aleph truly refused discussion, he would have already ordered an attack instead of talking. Inside the room, multiple armed guards remain positioned around them, including several with guns aimed directly at Luca. Despite the pressure, Luca begins analyzing the situation and simulates possible outcomes in his mind. He considers using a sudden attack sequence, where he would flip the table, break the formation, rush Aleph, and take control of the room by using close-range gunfire and movement disruption. However, he does not act yet, and instead observes the situation further. Kinuan and Aleph continue discussing business as if the tension does not matter. Aleph questions the request and focuses on Luca's physical condition, pointing out that Luca's current body is still mostly organic and not properly upgraded for combat. He states that someone like Luca would normally get crushed in seconds inside the arena. Even so, Aleph agrees to place him in the match while asking for something in return. Kinuan responds by revealing that he knows where the previous owner's hidden safe is located, which immediately changes Aleph's reaction. The mention of the old owner's secrets creates suspicion, and Aleph becomes more alert because he realizes Kinuan knows more than he should. Kinuan remains calm and refuses to expand on his knowledge, treating it as something from the past that does not require explanation. Aleph then shifts the conversation and offers VIP treatment such as special seating, drinks, and other privileges, but Kinuan only accepts drinks and rejects unnecessary attention for Luca. Luca observes Kinuan's behavior closely and recognizes that he controls the entire negotiation without showing any pressure or urgency, which makes Luca realize how much experience Kinuan has in handling power dynamics. Some time later, inside the waiting room of the Colosseum, Kinuan informs Luca that the match will begin in 2 hours and suggests using the time to warm up. Luca instead questions him about the safe belonging to the previous owner and why Aleph's behavior changes so quickly when it is mentioned. Kinuan checks information on a device and explains that the safe contains valuable items that could completely change a person's status and power. He avoids giving full details and instead redirects attention to the upcoming fight. He then reveals Luca's opponent through a display, showing a fighter named Gabriel, Steel Fist. Kinuan explains that the Colosseum is filled with fighters who implant illegal enhancements into their bodies, even if it shortens their lifespan, and that Gabriel belongs to that category, making him extremely dangerous and unstable. Luca studies the opponent's image and immediately recognizes the level of modification involved, understanding that the opponent relies heavily on artificial enhancements rather than natural ability. Kinuan warns that in Luca's current condition, even a single clean hit could be fatal. He reminds Luca to rely on the principles of the fighting style he has been training under, focusing on instinct and reaction rather than rigid technique. When Luca questions the principle, Kinuan responds that true control comes from accepting what one has and adapting it fully. Luca rejects this idea internally because he believes survival depends on pushing beyond limits rather than accepting them. Kinuan responds by comparing it to water, explaining that it does not resist force but changes shape according to pressure, and that real strength comes from adaptation rather than resistance. He also states that he has been observing Luca since the earlier training tests, especially when Luca managed to reflect bullets without full equipment assistance. Kinuan further expresses that he was surprised when Luca directly requested training, but he believes Luca is suited for this path because of his natural instincts. Luca hears the praise but remains unsure about its sincerity, sensing that Kinuan may be testing him more than encouraging him. Kinuan calmly adds that this conversation might also be their last, depending on how the upcoming fight ends. As the arena lights activate, Aleph announces the beginning of the match and introduces Gabriel, known as Steel Fist, questioning whether Luca will survive the encounter. The crowd reacts with excitement, expecting violence and entertainment from the fight. Luca steps forward into the arena while ignoring the crowd's insults and expectations. He observes their reactions and understands that they are not there for meaning or skill but for bloodshed and destruction. That realization does not disturb him because it feels familiar. Instead of hesitation, he feels a strange sense of comfort in the atmosphere, as if the chaos matches his internal state. He then removes his hood and prepares to fight, fully entering the arena, where survival depends entirely on strength and reaction. Luca stays inside the arena while the atmosphere of the Colosseum pushes him back into memories he normally avoids. He recalls how life in the past never allowed comfort because rations only arrive rarely, and most of the time hunger stays constant. He also remembers how the orphanage system often gets exploited, with food supplies being stolen or sold for personal gain, which forces survival to depend entirely on personal strength. Because of that environment, he grows up without hesitation toward hardship. Even when food becomes scarce, he continues training instead of stopping. He studies old books until they fall apart and uses discarded metal pieces for physical conditioning, building strength through whatever is available. His memory also returns to a moment where other children mock him and question his behavior. They assume his effort is pointless and claim he only wastes energy. Luca responds at that time by treating hunger as something that can be controlled through force, while also adopting the belief that the strong dominate and the weak get consumed. Because of that mindset, he deals harshly with anyone who interferes with him, reinforcing the idea that survival belongs only to strength. The other children later dismiss him completely and label him as someone with no future, but Luca ignores their judgment because he already accepts that the world does not reward weakness. At the age of 12, he passes the aptitude test and enters the list of potential Imperial Guard trainees. By 15, he officially joins the training program, which confirms that his path separates completely from the place he grew up in. From that point onward, he cuts emotional ties and decides not to return mentally to that past. When the present moment in the Colosseum begins, the crowd chants the name Gabriel, building pressure inside the arena. Gabriel steps forward and immediately questions Luca's presence, treating him as an unworthy opponent. He assumes Luca is a weak selection and dismisses the fight as something that should not exist. Luca observes Gabriel carefully and evaluates his body. He notices that Gabriel's enhancements come from multiple manufacturers and lack structural balance. The spine shows signs of distortion from overload, and the flesh around metal connections appears inflamed from continuous strain. Even so, Gabriel still moves with overwhelming strength, which confirms that durability alone does not decide survival. Gabriel closes distance and mocks Luca directly, insulting his appearance and suggesting dominance over him. Luca responds calmly and states that after the fight, Gabriel will be the one needing help instead. That response provokes Gabriel further, who declares that he will crush Luca until he begs. At that moment, the Colosseum announcer introduces the match as a life-or-death spectacle where only one side survives. The crowd reacts with excitement, demanding a violent outcome and expecting a quick execution. Luca fully understands the situation because Gabriel's body consists mostly of combat-grade modifications. Any single mistake leads to instant death, which makes the fight extremely dangerous for him. The battle begins when Gabriel launches a heavy steel fist strike toward him. Luca reacts instantly and avoids the attack by shifting aside, causing the blow to hit the ground instead. He counters with a quick kick to Gabriel's face, but the impact barely affects him because of the reinforcement in his body. Luca recognizes that his opponent's durability exceeds normal limits, which forces him to rely on movement and timing instead of raw power. He keeps distance while studying attack patterns and realizes that Gabriel's strikes, although powerful, follow predictable mechanical motion due to limited joint structure and visible trigger movements in the shoulders. The audience grows frustrated because Luca avoids direct confrontation and refuses to engage in a pure exchange of strength. They demand a faster and more brutal outcome, shouting for him to be destroyed or crushed, but the fight continues without satisfying their expectations. Luca begins to understand the real purpose behind his training under Kinuan. He recalls Kinuan's instruction that strength alone does not decide victory and that available resources must be used fully instead of waiting for ideal conditions. This thought reinforces his decision to continue adapting instead of relying on external help. He also remembers that Kinuan only upgrades partial equipment and leaves certain limitations in place, which forces Luca to learn control instead of dependency. That realization makes him focus on precision rather than power. Luca analyzes Gabriel's movement further and identifies clear weaknesses in range, vision structure, and attack timing. He understands that every strike contains a visible preparation phase, which gives him enough time to react if he stays focused. As Gabriel attacks again, Luca moves with sharper control and begins predicting the rhythm of each strike. Kinuan observes from a distance and silently acknowledges that Luca is beginning to understand the core of the Ares fighting style, which relies on adaptation and instinct rather than memorized technique. The fight escalates when Luca successfully reads an incoming attack and uses that timing to grab Gabriel's arm, redirect his momentum, and spin him off balance. Gabriel gets thrown to the ground, and Luca follows up with a controlled strike that shows confidence instead of hesitation. Gabriel stands again and dismisses Luca's technique as useless tricks, then launches another heavy punch that narrowly misses and hits the wall behind Luca. Luca counters immediately by grabbing him and shifting his position, then explains through action that strength alone cannot decide the outcome. He pushes himself above Gabriel and uses both hands to control his head before forcing a rotation that destabilizes him completely. After landing back on the ground, Luca continues the fight with steady focus while ignoring the crowd completely. The spectators remain confused because the fight does not follow their expectation of a quick massacre. Instead of panic, Luca maintains control and declares internally that he will continue moving upward until the voices of the crowd no longer reach him, showing that his goal stays fixed on survival and progress rather than approval.